And just like that, I am here with the man himself, Scott Monty. Seersucker is broken out. We are here. We are ready. What would you think that, what's that guy called, Skype Room Rater or whatever? What would you say the room rating would be on the Monty estate?
I think he'd give me a solid 8. There's a little cleanup that needs to happen around here. I think the leg lamp should rate, right?
Yes.
The books behind me, those have all been read or are in the process of being read. But there's a little clutter here on the desk. I don't mind admitting that. I'm a working man. What can I say?
And I think that's the best way to make it. I am always, one of the first dings I gave to Armano about his crazy Airstream, not Armano, Aoyang, about his crazy Airstream setup, is I said it looks fake and virtual because it is so perfectly set up. You need to throw a sock on that bed or something.
Or a cat. By the way,
or a cat who is running around now being very grumpy.
I mentioned this before the show. There will be 100% fewer cat anuses, or whatever we say, on my side at least, in this show.
Such a fun thing. Scott, we've known each other forever. I'm thinking it was a Boston event. It was at the Jazz Club or something like that. It has been ages and a half.
It has. I would say it's been about 15 years, Chris.
I think 15. I think you are really one of Mano. I think you are really one of the very, very earliest people that I connected with in this space. It was basically like Penn and then you in person in the Boston scene.
Yeah.
And who knew the rocket ride you would take? I mean, you've been everywhere. Talk just a little bit about the retrospective being Scott Monty. Pretend this is your tribute to the Mark Twain Awards or something.
Well, I didn't set out to be Scott Monty, and still in many ways, I don't feel like I am. I'm still the guy that takes the garbage out every Thursday night. I was blessed to be called up by Ford in 2008 to serve as an executive on their team with Alan Mulally as the CEO, one of the most storied CEOs of the early 20th century, first at Boeing and then at Ford. It was all timing. Ford was in the midst of the carpocalypse and was coming back at the same time that social media was starting to take off. And there was this kind of nexus where the two met in the middle. And that's what I was hoping would happen. I couldn't have predicted the, mechanical precision with which it did happen. And as you say, the rocket ride that resulted. I am a byproduct of that. I am not the rocket fuel. I am simply the guy that comes out and waves to the cameras as he gets on the rocket. It's the team. It's the plan that was put in place. It was I helped to design the strategy, but it couldn't be done without a whole host of people making it happen.
It's, I think back to the way old days of getting messages from you. I think back to gee, would you mind before Ford, hey, you share this little thing. And it was and next thing you know, it's Ford. There's that picture of Mullally's arm around you in some hallway or something like that. And by the way, this image in my head is the coach talking to the QB after the big game kind of a shot. It is black and white in my mind now. It's a mess. It's I'm so Irish. Well, but
you're not far off, Chris, because early on in my career there, I mean, Alan, the communications team was on the 10th floor, and the executive, the C-suite was on the 11th and 12th floor. And Alan would come down and pop into our meetings from time to time. And I had a lot of meetings upstairs in the executive suite, but he would pop down into our meetings, and he was that friendly. And I'll never forget, I was at the New York Auto Show in April of 2009, and we had just pulled something off, some major thing. And I get a phone call from the headquarters. Scott, this is Amy. Can you hold for Alan? Well, Amy was his executive assistant. I said, sure. And Alan just came on and goes, Scott, I wanted to tell you what a fantastic job you guys are doing and how I saw it, whatever it was, the launch or the announcement. And it is just an honor to serve with you. And I'm like, this is the CEO of a global company, right? 200,000 employees across the world. He takes the time out to call me. And he didn't just do it with me. He did it with lots of people. He would scribble notes to people when they were in the internal company news headlines. He would call customers or prospective customers. He was just that kind of a guy. And it's inspiring leadership.
What an opportunity to feel so jaded for the entire rest of your life. You know, no other large company is going to do that. Not, very few mid-sized companies are going to do it as well as that happened for you.
True. And I'll tell you, one of the executive coaches that we had there at Ford, and a lot of the executive team had access to him, is a guy by the name of Harry Cohen. Now, Harry is a psychologist, and he actually owns an oyster and martini bar.
Of course he does.
And I've known Harry for a long time, and Harry observed what was going on. And he looked at Alan's leadership, and he looked at the personality traits that it took. And Harry actually wrote a book now called Be the Sun, Not the Salt. Because you think, and it's all about heliotropic leadership, as he calls it, heliotropic, following the sun, the power of the sun, because that's what flowers do. You watch sunflowers and they follow the track of the sun throughout the day. And when you put salt on the roots of a plant, it shrivels up and dies. The same kind of thing applies in leadership. If you can have a positive, uplifting outlook, and it's not about being Pollyanna-ish, right? You still have to be practical. But if you can spend time smiling at people and remembering their names and taking a page out of this old book. I have a bookshelf right next to me for handy reference. Out of this book, right? This was written in 1922, and it's still a Bible of leadership today. And that's exactly what Harry actually predicated a lot of his Be the Sun, Not the Salt leadership experiences on.
Here's like the worst, egregious, awful name drop ever. Early reviews of Trust Agents with Julian Smith, and I said, this isn't new. This is basically some kind of recover of How to Win Friends and Influence People. I was like, thank you. Can I put that on the next book cover? I'll take it.
You think so? I mean, that's right.
That's the quote, right? You know, that's what I need. Scott, I want to turn 90 degrees because I don't know how to segue. I've learned this. I would have been like that CEO right off the cliff. You are a man in love with times before your time. You're a man in a seersucker suit and a bow tie who has sold the future to several companies. How did that paradox happen?
Well, you know, Chris, it's funny because my newsletter is called Timeless and Timely. And I took to wearing the bow tie seriously after I left Ford. You know, we were business formal back then. So I would wear a suit and tie to the office every day. And occasionally I would break out the bow tie. And the thing with the bow tie is as soon as you wear it, people go, you're the bow tie guy. And I go, I have 400 other ties and you're picking the bow tie out as, you know, my signature look. It just sticks with you. And one of the things I like about the bow tie is that it never goes out of style, primarily because it's never in style, right? So it's the same reason, you know, I use fountain pens and stationery, right? It's this analog meets digital. Why? Because there are some things in humanity that are timeless, that will carry through regardless. And who doesn't like receiving a handwritten letter from somebody? Especially today, when you're being texted and slacked and DM'd and emailed about everything. If you get a handwritten letter from somebody in the mail, it's personal, it's meaningful. It shows that they took the time to care. And we need more of that in society. So to me, the bow tie, the fountain pen, the books, my focus on history and literature, this is all part of the brand, all part of the same thing, which is to understand what commonalities we have with each other as human beings and where we can look for patterns. That's what historians do. They look for patterns and call out what's going on, because you will see that we are cyclical. Humans continue to make not the same, but similar mistakes. And it's often been said that history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme, right? And if you are a historical poet, shall we say, or a business poet of sorts, and you can understand the meter, and you can understand what's coming next by looking at what's past, you can actually help executives and their teams navigate around things that they may be getting confused with, right? So people get so hung up on the platforms. People get so hung up on, you know, oh, should I be on this? Should I be on that? What's our TikTok strategy? What's our Snapchat strategy? It doesn't matter. As long as you have a business strategy and a communication strategy, it can fit into whatever template, whatever platform comes next. And that's what I'm tasked with is helping executives get their head out of the sand and the head out of the clouds and operate on a plane where most humans operate.
Scott, you do the grown-up version of some of what I do insofar as I like to really share my passions and interests, as part of my narrative. I tell people about the kinds of things I'm interested in as a bridging tool, as an analogy tool. The only difference is you talk about really cool things like, classic 1950s cocktails, and you talk about, Sherlock Holmes and the like, and I talk about video games and stuff that CEOs don't want to hear about. I want to talk one last minute about this concept of bridging and the idea of, history not repeating, but, I think that there's a part of the Scott Monty DNA that brings that forward. How do you codify that into, business experience? How do you bring this to the meetings and whatnot?
Well, to your point, Chris, I think it's really about using analogies. It's helping people create that bridge from something that they understand. And look, I was a classics major, which is why I can get away with a lot of this stuff. And also, I've got a mind like a sponge. I love consuming information. And what is history but a bunch of stories, right? And when you are leading a company and you're trying to create a culture is simply the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. It's as simple as that, right? And I know you're big on storytelling, Chris. And to me, it's something we can all relate to. So if I can sit in a meeting and frame something for someone in terms of a story, I remember early on in my days at Ford getting a raised eyebrow about a lot of this social stuff. And I said, well, I was actually reading a story in a business journal where an executive had been approached by one of his employees who said, look, there's this new technology we want to try out. And, they were really gung-ho about it. I want to try out this new technology. We think it's going to change our business. Can we do it? Can we do it? Can we do it? The executive finally caved. He said, look, I will go along with this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one kiosk in the middle of all the cubicles in the middle of everybody's desk so I can watch what's going on. So time doesn't get abused, and so that company secrets don't get shared and things like that. But do you know that the article that I was reading was in a business journal from the 1920s, and the technology was a telephone? So, for the executive in those days, about 10 years ago, that was hesitant about social media and putting up a lot of those same arguments, I said that we've been here before. Right. And is there a person who doesn't have a phone on their desk or a phone in their pocket right now? Think about the transformative nature of communications and why we're trusting people with it. It's the same as we were dealing with 70, 80, 90 years ago with a different technology.
With a different tech yet again. Listen, there's been a couple of comments rolling through about how I love Scott's voice. He sounds like a TV news anchor. Fellow bow tie wearer Drew Davis says, I could listen to Scott read the phone book. I want to go another 90 degrees. Scott Monty, you are 90-degree territory right now. Okay. You, sir, are known for your voice talents. And for instance,
did we lose Chris? Ladies and gentlemen, we're on standby here as we wait for Chris Brogan to rejoin the broadcast. I guess I'm on my own. This is great.
I'm not joining you. It's your stage. I'm making you do it. Go be the Scott Monty. I forgot that my mic cuts when I pulled that thing off. I want you to maybe give a particular impersonation or two, perhaps just a little taste of maybe Johnny Carson and a few other voices that you've been made to drag out, usually after a few cocktails.
Well, I
hand the stage to you.
Thank you, sir. It is too early for cocktails today, although I know you and I both love a gimlet. But Chris, this is Johnny Carson here on the Tonight Show. We actually have the great Karnak. You remember Karnak, who knows the questions but not the answers, or discerns the questions from the answers, which are sealed in an envelope and kept in a mayonnaise jar on Funkin' Wagnall's porch. And in this case, the answer is sis boom ba. Sis boom ba. And the question is, what sound does an exploding sheep make? Sis boom ba. Right. Of course, one of the other favorites that you're back in. One of the other favorites is well, there's many from The Simpsons. Uh,
Yes.
my kids were recently asking me about Homer J. Simpson. Homer, what does the J stand for? The J stands for genius. No, the J stands for J. My name's Joey Jojo Junior Flabadoo.
Oh, that's the stupidest name I ever heard.
Oh, come back, Joey Jojo. All right, that's all I'm gonna do right now.
That's fine. How many times do people beg you to do this in absolutely inappropriate context just like this?
Every time I see Kerry Gargone.
Dance, monkey, dance.
Pretty much, yeah. I will never forget. I was in grad school, and a good friend of mine, his brother came into town, and he goes, "Oh, Joe says you're funny. Say something funny."
Oh,
I go, I'm not that kind of a comic. I'm not Milton Berle, who's being fed by a team of writers. I am a situational. I am a wit, not a comic. That's where I stand.
Related but not. I always tell people I'm a reporter, not a journalist. One can report, but to be a journalist is a full-time profession. It seems like that would be similar to a wit.
Yeah. That's pretty much the same. Pretty much the same. But I enjoy it. And recently I've actually been using not just the voice talents, but the presence for the folks at Brand Innovators. I don't know if you followed any of their stuff. They do or had done in-person events all around the country. They would find brands that would host them at corporate headquarters, and they would bring in publishers and ad tech companies and other brands to speak about a particular topic. Well, they've had to go all virtual now. And they approached me back in April, and they said, would you be interested in being a regular MC for the program? And they're doing these live events that go from like 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock on a single day. And let me tell you, it's exhausting, but it's incredibly rewarding because I get to combine my experience as a brand executive with my ability to stand up in front of a camera or in front of a crowd and keep their attention wrapped, and to be able to bridge from presentation to presentation, and then at the end of the day, kind of sum it all up with some pearls of wisdom as they flow from my mouth.
If you give those pearls of wisdom before lunch, is that truly pearls before swine?
Only if you're having pulled pork for lunch, Chris.
Chip Griffin wants to know, did you actually just say nitwit? But I think that's a different thing.
Nitwit. I don't think I said nitwit.
You said something about being a wit. That's all. He's
hey, nah. Good one, Chip. I'm going to have to hire you. I don't have
There's no better comeback than good one. Scott, that is a long stretch of time. 5 hours is a long stretch of time. I know you're not doing it all. Obviously, you're the MC, you're the host. You have to be the glue, which means you have to be the most attentive, because you're not only covering your segment, you're covering the entire flow. This also requires your brand executive knowledge. It requires the entire body of pop culture and old culture references that you bring, and then to be able to thread it on the fly. How much do you actually think these people recognize that mix of talents versus just saying, oh, you're pretty good?
Well, based on their retaining me, I think they understand it. They've seen the response that the audience has gotten. When you bring in a professional to do this kind of thing, rather than just rely on your staff, who are usually too close to the situation to really give it enough perspective. But based on what they're paying me, I don't think they recognize it.
That just makes me think of the Mike Birbiglia joke about how he was presenting an award at this venue, and he said the last time he was here, he was the coat check boy, and he got paid more for that gig.
Yeah.
So no comment required, just a random connection. Your timeless and timely newsletter.
One of my favorite epithets comes from the very first Comedy Central roast of Drew Carey. 1999. This is going back to even before you and I knew each other, I think, Chris. Ryan Stiles was the MC, and Jeffrey Ross was the roast master. So Ryan Stiles gets up there, and you of course remember Ryan Stiles from the Drew Carey Show. He was the tall blonde guy, and he finishes up and brings up Jeffrey Ross, and Jeff Ross goes, Ryan Stiles, everybody, as I like to refer to him, Kramer Light. He goes, Ryan, I've been watching you for years on the Drew Carey Show, and I've been wondering if ABC has really been using you to your fullest potential. And tonight, I realized that they were.
You know, a good zing can be stored for such a long time, especially in a mind like yours, I think.
That is, well, you know, there's some things that just stick with us.
That is true. Mayonnaise. So no, I will push to your newsletter now. I want to hear about Timeless and Timely, because this letter has evolved over the years. This has really grown, and this newest iteration, everyone loved the old one. Everyone was a Scott fan already, but this new iteration really changes and turns a corner.
Well, it does, and the old one was the full Monty. Before that, it was This Week in Digital, which was way too generic. Scott Stratton said, "Why don't you just call it the full Monty? I mean, you're giving it your all every week. It's your name. Fantastic. So I went with that, and I wrote it, gosh, on and off since 2013, I want to say. And every week I would have about 60, 70, 80 links in 8 different segments of business. And let me tell you, that's a lot of work. That's an awful lot of work. And then we saw the rise of email newsletters again. And you had newsletters like, I don't know, Morning Brew and The Skim. And, you know, they've got whole staffs of people that are working on this thing every single day. So for me to do a weekly, that's a roundup of all of that, it was just too meta, and it was too much work. So I found I was actually getting more enjoyment out of the essay that I would put at the top of the newsletter. And I thought, well, why don't I concentrate on that? And so what I did is I eliminated a whole bunch of the sections, and I still committed to giving people 3 links every week to something going on in the world, which I call present tense. That's timely. And then a timeless section of 3 other links of just stories I think that are neat, that people should read, whether they're long reads or something from history or something that's just fascinating. You know, like how the Nabisco, how Triscuit got its name was a few weeks back, right? Everybody had seen that. But to me, focusing on leadership, communications, strategy, and integrity, right, which are really about the 4 things that drive business, or that should drive business, and doing that through a lens of literature, history, philosophy, and poetry. And there's plenty of material out there that I can always go back to. And I never seem to be at a loss every week for what the topic is going to be, because something always pops in the news, in business, in society, and politics that makes it relevant. So to me, it's about going broader, going bigger, without driving down in that niche of social and digital that I was known for so many years.
I feel that the transition freed you from some, I'm sort of saying something that I'm telling myself, but I'm telling you so I can pretend that I'm hearing it, right? So I sometimes worry that the things I'm known for, if I don't pull them forward with me, then eventually I'll just go dead silent. No one will know or want to know what I'm talking about. And I feel like this change, Timeless and Timely, in some ways is that. It's you shedding some of your duty to provide a much better and much more cohesive technology.
Right. And look, I'll always have the expertise, the domain expertise of social and digital with me. Will I know the ins and outs of how to run a Facebook ad, or what the latest iteration is on filters on TikTok? Probably not. That's not my job. That's not the kind of thing I want to be tasked with. I want to help people kind of rise over that, look at the bigger issues, and quite frankly, solve business problems, not just solve communications problems. I want to help leaders get unstuck, right? And if you can do that with timeless and timely advice, a lot of this happens in a crisis. You go, oh, what are we going to do? We have to respond to COVID. We have to respond to Black Lives Matter. All right, well, let's step back. Let's see what we've done before. Let's see what people are looking for now, and how we can help those 2 things meet in the middle.
What is your opening salvo to some company who decides that they need to work with you? What is especially if they kind of know of you a bit, but they're not as caught up right now.
Sure.
How do you start the storyline with them?
Well, it's similar to what I tell people about my newsletter. It's not for everybody. Right? I am not for everybody. And to me, you have to be able to sit in a room with me for at least an hour. And I need to hear from you. I need to understand what it is that's going through your mind right now, what it is that you're struggling with, for me to be able to respond. I am more of like an advisor and a corporate therapist than I am a consultant. And I don't mean to cheapen what therapists do, but I think a lot of what's needed, and this is why it's hard to package sometimes the advisory work, because it's like that old Supreme Court definition of porn. I can't define it, but I'll know it when I see it, right? For somebody to just spend some time with me and get a flavor as to what I do, a lot of the clients I have, they're because I've had trusted relationships with people, the people that I've followed and who have followed me for years. It's not because I sent out a cold email or made a cold call. Maybe somebody saw me speak somewhere. Okay, well, that's a start. Then it's an opening for another conversation. I don't have a prepackaged set of goods that I say, well, here's everything that I do, because everything I do is actually based on everything that you need. And I learned recently from our friend Laura Gassner-Otting, not to say how can I help, but to say, what do you need? Right? Because for people to respond to how can I help? Well, they don't know necessarily what I do. I am a better arbiter of what I do. So for them to say, well, here's what I'm going through right now, here's what I need, would Steve Jobs have invented the iPhone or the MP3, the iPod, if he asked people what how he could help? No. What do you need? I need a better way to listen to songs on the go. Okay, gotcha. Right. I need a better way to connect with my family. Okay, gotcha. That's the difference between prepackaging something and being a responsive advisory, kind of trusted counsel to people. And it's funny because back in the early days when you and I first got acquainted, I was working for Crayon,
Right.
Joe Jaffe. And you remember my title at Crayon? Probably not. It was
No.
Consigliere.
Yes.
I was the Tom Hagen of the group. I was the trusted counsel, right? And it's something that's just stuck with me for many, many years.
It's a great title to have. I don't think that there are as many good titles out there anymore, and I think consigliere is a timeless title. And one other thing is there's been a kind of other segue thrown at you. I was also going to say faster horse. I was just going to say it because I knew you were thinking it. But we want to talk Sherlock Holmes for a minute.
Sure.
You so happen to also do a little bit of Sherlocking. You have had a podcast about Sherlock for how long?
Since 2007. I hear of Sherlock everywhere.
Yes.
Oh, hang on. My light is going nuts here. Okay, here we go.
I really thought the cops were coming. I just figured we'd go right. We'll do it live.
I don't. Good old Bill O'Reilly. So I've been interested in Sherlock Holmes since I was a teenager. And early on, I discovered that there's a whole group of people, a subculture of people out there that meet regularly to discuss Sherlock Holmes, or at least have Sherlock Holmes as their common interest. And I went to my first meeting before I was even able to drive. And I discovered this was a social network of sorts. Everyone from plumbers to presidents and everyone in between, and they welcomed me in because I shared their interest. It was a social network in 1986 or 87. Okay. And this followed me. When I moved away to Boston, I found there were a couple of Sherlock Holmes societies in Boston. Eventually, I was invested into the Baker Street Irregulars, which is a 300-person exclusive literary society that's been around since 1934. So to me, it's about finding interesting people that are interested in the same kind of thing. And I started the podcast in 2007. It's evolved as well over the years. But for the last 3 years or so, we've been on a very regular cadence. One show on the 15th and the 30th of every month, or the 28th if you're in February. And it's an interview show. I say we are like the fresh air of Sherlock Holmes fans. Right. And again, that's the analogy. People know fresh air. People know Terry Gross.
Right.
Hosts, and we kind of joke around with each other. So it's kind of like a cross between fresh air and car talk, if you want to stay with the car thing, for Sherlock Holmes fans. And it works great. We talk to, if you watched the BBC Sherlock, for example, we talked to the producers of that show, Mark Gatiss and Stephen. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name. I should really know this. Talked to the producer. We talked to Laura Pulver, who was Irene Adler on that show. We talked to authors. We talked to the playwright Ken Ludwig. We've talked to Fritz Weaver, who played Sherlock. Fritz Weaver from Twilight Zone, and he played Sherlock Holmes on Broadway in the 1960s. I mean, we get to meet so many interesting people that all have Sherlock Holmes at their core. It's a wonderful.
Well, to that point, Kip wants to know: can you do Benedict being Sherlock?
No, I can't. And
that's a tricky one.
I am in awe of Benedict Cumberbatch's impressions. If you've ever seen him do a Rickman off with Jimmy Fallon, that's the classic.
I like that. I very much love his Tom Hiddleston.
Yeah.
But I think that he's done some really good ones. Him doing Graham Norton laughing was even cute for me.
Yeah.
So, well, have you in the past, and do you ever rate your various Sherlocks?
Oh, sure. As a matter of fact, let me see if I can pull it up. I was
going to say, you'll probably just have the reference right handy, but here's the episode where we did that.
One of the guys we had on the show was a cartoonist by the name of Tom Richmond. Now, Tom Richmond may not be a household name to everyone, but the publication that until the last year or so that he worked for, Mad Magazine. And Tom has done some of the most amazing caricatures out there. So I'm going to see if I can make this happen on
live video.
StreamYard. Yes, I am going to share. There we go. See if you can see that.
Oh, let me see. Hang on.
Are we?
I will submit this to evidence, and there we go.
There it is. So this is a caricature that Tom Richmond did, and I have he did 8 special edition prints. I have number 5 that he inscribed for me. This is from left to right: John Barrymore, who played Sherlock Holmes in 1922. Basil Rathbone, of course, from 1939 to 1945. Peter Cushing, who played Sherlock Holmes in The Hound of the Baskervilles for Hammer, the Hammer horror films in 1959, and then went on to play Sherlock Holmes on television in the late 1960s. Christopher Plummer from Murder by Decree in 1979, which has a wonderful scene where James Mason as Watson is trying to stab the final P on his plate. And Plummer goes, "Watson, what on earth are you doing?" And Mason goes, "I'm trying to corner the last P on my plate." And then Holmes comes over and takes the tines of the fork and smashes the P against the plate and hands the fork to Watson. And Mason very it goes, "You squashed my P." Anyway, continuing, we have Michael Caine in 1988's Without a Clue. Jeremy Brett.
I cannot imagine Michael Caine doing Sherlock Holmes. That's all I have to say about that.
That film is hysterical because the whole premise is Watson is the genius, and he hired an actor to play Sherlock Holmes, and he's a
got
drunk.
it.
Oh, it's incredibly.
Got it. Okay, now I'm good.
Then we've got Jeremy Brett, who was Sherlock Holmes on PBS from 1984 to 1991. Robert Downey Jr. In the 2, soon to be 3 big blockbuster Sherlock Holmes films, and finally Benedict Cumberbatch. So that is, and there are hundreds of other actors who have played Sherlock Holmes. He is actually the most portrayed fictional character on screen. My favorite, because they say you always love your first, is Jeremy Brett. I think that 41 episodes in the Granada PBS series. And we're actually we're going to be getting Rebecca Eaton, who's an executive producer for Masterpiece Mystery. We're going to have her on the show. He and Michael Cox, the team that actually produced that, were so faithful to the stories for so long. And they just did a marvelous job with the props, the costumes, the settings, the plots, everything. And Brett really brought an additional sense of humanity to the character of Holmes.
I regret that Pete Holmes won't add to that pantheon with his imitation of Cumberbatch. I'm fairly sure you've been sent that piece of film already.
Absolutely. That's funny.
I love it because if anyone ever asks me, because I read not all of, but a good chunk of the original Holmes, everyone says, well, why? What's about? And I said, because and I would always use the same example because I don't have your memory for it. So I'd always say there's a scene and there's a key lock and there's scratches around it. So he explains how drunk he is. And all I thought was, I don't drink ever. My key lock looks that way. And so when Pete Holmes and they brought that up, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like right out of my brain. But I think, it's interesting that these are you'd spend more time watching that willingly than, I don't know, the Lord of the Rings series or something, whatever. It's interesting to me that where we land, in our entertainment and in our, what we use to refuel us.
Yeah. And look, we can all get different things out of it, whether it's escapism, or whether it is, looking for a larger lesson in life. I think there are, the sky's the limit. My interests don't have to be your interest. And to me, as long as you've got something that occupies you and that, and that makes you interesting to other people, I think that's what it is. If you're passionate about something, that passion will come through regardless. And to me, if I may, I'm gonna kind of cross streams here. We've been talking about Sherlock Holmes, but I also talked earlier about poetry, right?
Correct.
And cycles and looking for patterns. There's a couple of great Sherlockian poems that we recite at meetings. The first is it was written in 1943 by Vincent Sterrett, who was a Chicago bookman and newspaper columnist, and it's called 221B. And he talks about, here though the world explode, these two survive, and it's always 1895. And to me, that's about the timeless nature of Holmes and Watson and about our escapism. And typically, that's the most famous poem that is. And it's a whole sonnet, right? So there's a number of lines, but there's an even better one that was written in the 1980s by a friend of a friend, a guy by the name of Bill Schweikert. It's called A Long Evening with Holmes. So, if I may. When the world rushes in with worries and cares, and my problems and headaches are coming in pairs, I just climb in my mind up those 17 stairs and spend a long evening with Holmes. The good doctor greets me and motions me in. Holmes grasps my hand and lays down his violin. Then we sit by the fire and sip a tall gin when I spend a long evening with Holmes. And while we're discussing his cases galore, if I'm lucky, there comes a loud knock at the door. In stumbles a client, head spattered with gore, when I spend a long evening with Holmes. Watson binds up the client's poor face, while Holmes soon extracts all the facts of the case. Then off in a hansom to Brixton we race, when I spend a long evening with Holmes. The adventure is solved, Holmes makes it all right, then back to the lodgings by dawn's early light, and a breakfast by Hudson to wind up the night, when I spend a long evening with Holmes. So this modern rat race can't keep me in a cage. I have a passport to a far better age. As close as the bookshelf, as near as a page, I can spend a long evening with Holmes.
Wow. This is the first. Yesterday, David Armano sang Billy Joel to me, and today I've received poetry. So this is becoming a thing. We'll have the entertainment segment. Who knew?
Fantastic. Well, like I said, 100% fewer cat ani than yesterday.
Yes. And the creature that inhabits my house temporarily has been completely avoiding me. So I'm very pleased by all of this. Scott, Monty, it's been an absolute pleasure. I can't fathom leaving this thing rolling as it goes because you just really nailed it. Bravo, and a standing ovation all the way from Scotland, by the way.
Wow. Well, thank you, Carol. Thank you, Kip. Thank you, Chloe. You were all very, very kind.
They are very kind. Scott, thank you once again for being part of this. Thank you for sharing some timeless and timely things with us. And I appreciate the efforts you brought to be every bit the Scott Monty that everyone knows and everyone loves.
Well, I appreciate you and everything you're doing here, Chris. And I'm honored to be part of Digital OG Week here on Catch Up.
Who'd have thunk it?
I know,
all right. I'm letting you be. Thank you so much, everybody. Get out of here already. I'll see you soon. Take good care. Vaya con quesos.